The music was loud, the crowd louder. At the center of it all stood the rock champion, sweat on his brow, microphone in hand, ego on full display. He had just crushed another challenger. No contest, no effort. He laughed, pacing the stage, soaking in the cheers. Then he shouted, "Any real singer here?" The crowd roared. Most thought it was a joke, a line. Another way to show there was no one left. Then someone moved. A man stepped out from the side, quiet, unannounced, almost ignored. No spotlight followed him. No introduction was given. He walked straight onto the stage. The champion smirked, leaning in close, microphone raised, ready to humiliate him. But as the man lifted his own mic and brought it just 1 inch from his lips, the front row went still. Because they recognized him. The man the champion had just challenged was Elvis Presley, and he hadn't even sung yet. The entire arena seemed to pause. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. The champion's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. He didn't recognize the true significance of who stood before him. This wasn't just another singer stepping up with a plate. This was a legend. The king himself. The undisputed king. Stay with me until the end. Because what happened the moment he opened his mouth turned a bold challenge into complete silence. The man who issued the challenge was not someone who expected to be taken seriously by anyone worth taking seriously. His name was Colt Daren. He was 34 years old, built like a barroom door, and had been performing on these regional stages for the better part of a decade. He wasn't famous the way famous really means, but in that circuit, in those rooms, he was something close to it. Loud, commanding, impossible to ignore. The kind of performer who filled a venue by sheer force of personality rather than any particular gift. His reputation was built on confrontation. That was the act. Not the music so much as the challenge. He would pull in an audience, work them up, and then at some point in the night, he'd turn it into a contest. He'd done it in Shreveport. He'd done it in Birmingham. He'd done it twice in Nashville and walked away both times with the crowd eating out of his hand. He had a way of framing the whole thing so that refusing to answer looked like weakness. It was smart, in its way. Mean, but smart. He had a voice. That part was true. It was rough and big, and it carried. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't the kind of voice that made you feel anything particular, but it was loud enough to cover that. And on a night like this one, loud was usually enough. The venue was a mid-sized concert hall outside of Memphis, March of 1974. A Thursday night, which meant the crowd was smaller than a weekend, but more serious. The people who showed up on a Thursday weren't there by accident. About 3,000 of them had packed into a hall built for maybe 2,500. And the air was already thick before Colt had played a single note. The lighting was heavy and amber. The stage was wide. There were speakers stacked in columns on both sides, and every time the bass hit, you felt it in your back teeth. Colt had opened strong. He'd played 40 minutes of material that kept the energy climbing, and by the time he stopped to breathe, the room was his. He knew exactly what he had. He could read a crowd the way certain men can read a hand of cards, and this crowd was ready for whatever he wanted to do next. That's when he issued it. He walked to the front of the stage, sweat already soaking through his collar, and he looked out at 3,000 people with the satisfaction of a man who has never once doubted himself. I've been doing this for 10 years, he said, and I want to know something. He let a beat pass. Is there a real singer in this building? The crowd laughed. They thought he was playing. I'm serious, he said, and his voice dropped just enough to make people wonder if he meant it. Anybody here think they can sing? Come on up. Prove it. The laughter settled into something more uncertain. A few people looked at each other. Nobody moved. That was the point. That was always the point. The challenge wasn't really a challenge. It was a demonstration. Look around this room. Nobody. Not one person willing to step forward. Which means I'm the best thing in here, and we all know it. He let the silence stretch, grinning, pacing, completely comfortable in the outcome he'd already decided. The band behind him held a low idle, waiting. Someone near the back whistled. A woman in the 5th row shook her head, smiling. Everyone understood the game. This was theater, not a contest. Nobody in that building thought anyone was going to answer. Elvis had been in the venue for almost an hour before any of that happened, sitting toward the back, not drawing attention. No entourage, no security circle, just a few people who knew him well enough to stay quiet and let him breathe. That was rare for Elvis in those years, rare and necessary. It was 1974, deep into the stretch that was quietly wearing him down. He'd been running on 2 shows a night, hotel rooms that blurred together, and a body that wasn't recovering the way it once had. The people closest to him knew the signs. The weight of it lived in his eyes now. Not defeat, not yet, but something close to exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. He wasn't supposed to be out that night. His road manager had half argued against it, but Elvis had insisted. He wanted to hear music without being the one responsible for it. Just sit, just listen, just be a person in a room who nobody had to worry about. He was there with 2 friends, a woman he'd known for years and one of his guys from the inner circle, the kind of company that didn't require him to perform being Elvis. They'd taken seats near the back corner, dim enough that he wasn't instantly recognizable. He had a drink in front of him he wasn't really touching. His shoulders were low. He looked, by every account from people who saw him that night, like a man who just wanted to disappear for a couple of hours. He was watching the stage with real attention. That mattered to him. He wasn't the kind of person who sat through music half-heartedly. Even tired, even worn thin, he listened the way people listen when music actually means something to them. His hands were quiet in his lap. He wasn't tapping along, he was just taking it in. And then the challenge went out. The rock champion's voice cut across the whole room with that particular kind of ego that doesn't bother lowering itself. Any real singer here. The crowd erupted. It was theater, and most people treated it like theater, cheering the spectacle of it, enjoying the moment the same way you enjoy a magician daring anyone to catch the trick. From the back corner, Elvis heard every word. The woman sitting next to him later said he went very still. Not tense, not angry. Still. The way he went still when something landed differently than expected. She'd seen that stillness before. She knew what it meant. It meant something had reached him somewhere he hadn't intended to leave open. His friend leaned over and said something quiet. Something along the lines of, "Leave it alone. "It's not worth it. You're not here for this." And Elvis didn't answer. He was still watching the stage, still processing something that the people around him couldn't quite read. Here's what nobody knew about Elvis in that particular season of his life. He was doubting himself. Not his talent, not exactly that, but something adjacent to it. Whether any of it still meant something. Whether what he did on stage was still real, or whether it had become, as he'd put it to a friend the previous year, a costume he couldn't take off. The challenge out there on that stage, stupid as it was, ego-driven as it was, had scraped against something tender. Any real singer here. He sat with it for maybe 90 seconds, his drink still untouched, his eyes still fixed forward, the crowd still buzzing, the champion still owning the room. His friend touched his arm. Elvis. He didn't respond. The woman beside him later said she could see him making the decision in real time. Not a dramatic moment, not a jaw-setting or a fire coming into his eyes. Just something quiet and settled moving across his face. The same way you decide to stand up when you've been sitting too long. Simple, almost inevitable. Then he stood up. He didn't rush. That was the first thing people noticed. No urgency, no performance. He moved through the crowd the way a man moves through a room he's been in 1,000 times before. Steady, unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be and all night to get there. The people nearest to him saw him first. A woman in the aisle seat turned her head as he passed, and she froze. Just for a second. Her mouth opened slightly. She said nothing. The man beside her followed her eyes, and he went still too. That's how it started. Not with noise, with silence. Small pockets of it spreading outward from wherever Elvis happened to be walking. He wasn't dressed for a stage. No jumpsuit, no scarves, nothing that announced what he was, or what he'd done, or how many records he'd sold. He looked like a man who had been sitting in a crowd, because that's exactly what he'd been doing. And somehow, that made it more unsettling to the people who recognized him. Because it meant this wasn't planned. It meant he had decided right then, in that moment, that this was worth doing. The champion couldn't see any of this yet. He was still working the front of the stage, still feeding off the energy he'd built, still in that place performers get to when the crowd is theirs and they know it. He'd issued his challenge and let it hang in the air and watched it go unanswered, and that silence had only made him bigger. That's what he thought it meant. Silence meant nobody was coming. Silence meant he was right. He wasn't watching the back of the room. Elvis kept moving. A teenager near the center section grabbed his friend's arm and pointed. His friend squinted toward the stage, confused, then looked back at Elvis, then back toward the stage again. Neither of them said a word out loud. They just watched. More people were turning now. Not all at once. Gradually. The way a wave builds before it breaks. Row by row, section by section, heads turning away from the stage and toward this man walking calmly through the middle of everything. Someone near the floor said his name. Not loudly, almost a whisper, but in a room where something strange is already happening. Even a whisper carries. The woman next to him gripped her seat. Elvis reached the front and stepped up without pausing. No hand extended, no one helping him up. He just moved onto the stage the same way he'd moved through the crowd, like it was nothing, like it was natural, like stages were simply where he existed. That's when the champion saw him. He turned and there was a man on his stage. His first instinct was irritation, then amusement. Because whoever this was, he was about to be embarrassed in front of everyone, and the champion had done this before. He'd built his whole reputation on moments exactly like this one. He smiled, that big, easy practice smile that said he wasn't worried. That said, he was already thinking about the punchline. He crossed the stage in a few steps, microphone up, leaning in close the way a man leans in when he wants everyone to know he's in control. He was ready to introduce the moment, ready to make this person a part of the show in a way that would be funny for everyone except them. Elvis raised his own microphone. He didn't say anything. He didn't introduce himself or explain why he was there, or acknowledge the challenge, or look out at the crowd. He just stood there, completely still, with the microphone 1 inch from his lips. Not performing, not yet. Just present, just breathing. And somewhere in that half second of quiet, the front row recognized him. Not all of them at once, one face, then another, eyes going wide, bodies going rigid. The specific kind of stillness that only happens when something is about to occur that cannot be taken back. The champion's smirk was still on his face when the first row went completely still. What came out of him did not sound like a challenge being answered. It sounded like something else entirely, something quieter than anyone expected, something that had no interest in the competition it was supposed to be part of. Elvis didn't open with power. He didn't open with showmanship. He opened with a single clean note, held for just a moment, barely above a whisper, and the effect was immediate. The air in the room changed, not slowly, all at once. People who were there described it the same way years later. They weren't sure at first that they'd actually heard it. The band was still adjusting. The noise hadn't fully died. But that note cut through everything the way something true cuts through noise, not by being louder, but by being more real than everything around it. One woman standing near the stage said she felt it before she processed what she was hearing. Something in her chest, she said. Something that made her stop mid-sentence and forget what she was talking about. The champion had expected a fight. That's the only thing his mind had room for. He'd issued a challenge, someone had answered, and his instinct was to measure the threat. He was still measuring when Elvis began. Still calculating. Still confident. His expression hadn't changed yet. That smirk was still there. Slightly amused, slightly dismissive. The face of a man who hasn't lost yet and doesn't believe he's about to. Then Elvis moved into the lyric. The song he chose was not a rock and roll song. That was the statement. He chose a gospel melody, slow and open. The kind of song that has no armor in it, no aggression, no performance tricks to hide behind. It was the last thing anyone in that building expected. The crowd had been primed for a showdown, for volume, for someone trying to outmuscle the champion on his own terms. What Elvis gave them instead was something that demanded a different kind of listening, something that asked the room to be still. His voice in those first verses was controlled, but only barely. There was emotion underneath it, pressing up against the edges of every line. Not grief, exactly. Not pain. Something older than either. The kind of feeling that has lived in a person so long it becomes part of how they breathe. The notes he chose weren't showy. They weren't designed to demonstrate range or to overwhelm. They were chosen the way someone chooses words when they finally decide to say the true thing. Carefully, with full understanding of the weight. 30 seconds in, the smirk on the champion's face was gone. Not replaced by anything dramatic. It simply disappeared. His jaw was slightly loose. His eyes had stopped moving the way they move when a person is still thinking about strategy. He wasn't thinking about strategy anymore. He was just standing there, listening, the same as everyone else. The song built the way gospel builds, patiently, with intention, each phrase widening the space around it. Elvis wasn't reaching for the ceiling. He was reaching for something inward, something the melody already knew how to find. By the second verse, the people nearest the stage had gone completely still. No shifting, no whispered conversations, no one checking to see how the champion was reacting. They had stopped watching the spectacle and started receiving something they didn't have a name for. What made that choice devastating in its simplicity was this. Any rock and roll response to a rock and roll challenge stays inside the same world. It's still competition. It's still two men measuring each other. But gospel doesn't compete. Gospel surrenders. It doesn't try to win rooms. It tries to reach something in people that was already there before the night started. Elvis understood that. He had understood it since he was a child, standing in a church in Tupelo, with nothing but the music and whoever was listening. The champion had issued a challenge. Elvis had answered it by refusing to enter it, by stepping outside the whole frame of the thing entirely and singing from a place the challenge couldn't touch. That was the statement. Not the volume, not the range. The choice itself. By the time the third verse began, no one in that building was thinking about who had won. They weren't thinking about the challenge or the crowd or what happened before Elvis walked to that stage. They were just there, inside the song, inside whatever truth it was carrying. The champion had stopped moving entirely. The crowd had been loud for most of the night, and then it was not loud at all. It didn't happen the way silence usually happens at a concert. A sudden cut, a technical problem, someone stopping the music. It happened in waves. The people closest to the stage felt it first. Something in the air shifted, the way the air shifts before a storm, and they stopped shouting before they understood why they'd stopped. Then the row behind them. Then the row behind that. It moved backward through the crowd like a slow tide pulling away from the shore. And within seconds, 2,000 people who had been screaming were simply standing there, not making a sound. That's not something that happens easily. People come to these nights wound up. They've had drinks. They're there for noise and heat and spectacle. Getting a crowd like that to go quiet takes something real. Elvis gave them something real. The band was still playing, but softer now, almost instinctively. The way musicians pull back when they sense the room has changed under them. The drummer loosened his grip. The guitarist stopped leaning into the speakers. They were following something they couldn't name, just the feeling that what was happening at the center of the stage required space. One of the backup musicians nearest the wings later said he couldn't explain why he played quieter. He just knew. "You know it when you hear it," he said. "You get out of the way." People near the back were standing on their chairs, not to see over a crowd anymore, but to hold the moment, to stay inside whatever this was. A woman in the fourth row had her hand over her mouth. She wasn't crying yet. She was holding herself very still, the way people hold still when they're afraid that moving will break something. The man beside her had his arms crossed, the defensive posture of someone who came in skeptical, and now his arms had dropped to his sides. He didn't notice. That's what real does to a person. It gets past the walls you didn't even know you'd put up. Nobody was looking at the champion anymore. That was the thing. For the entire night, every eye in that building had tracked him. His movement, his challenges, his laugh, his whole performed dominance over the room. He had owned the attention completely, and he'd done it on purpose, built his whole act around it. But now, not a single person was watching him. Every face was turned toward Elvis. The champion was still standing there, 10 feet away, microphone in hand, wearing the same expression he'd worn when he'd issued his challenge. But the room had simply moved past him, left him there like furniture. He tried shifting his weight. He glanced at a few faces in the front row. Nothing came back. The connection he'd held with the audience all night had vanished. Not broken exactly, just redirected. And there was nothing he could do to reclaim it while Elvis was still singing. His bravado had been built for a room that needed entertaining. This room no longer needed to be entertained. It needed to listen. A security guard near a side of the stage had stepped back against the wall, arms at his sides. He'd been on guard for most of the night, tracking movement, watching for problems. Now he was just watching Elvis. Off-duty in every way that mattered, just a person in a room hearing something that stopped him cold. The people who had laughed at the champion's joke, any real singer here, they weren't laughing now. Some of them looked almost embarrassed. Not at the champion exactly, but at themselves for not seeing it coming. For thinking it was a joke. For assuming no one would answer. The answer was still going. And the room was still held by it. Held completely, held quietly, held the way something sacred holds you when you're not expecting it and you don't have the language yet for what you're feeling. Nobody laughed. When it was over, the champion still had the microphone in his hand and nothing to say into it. He stood there. The crowd watched him. He looked down at the mic like it had betrayed him somehow, like the object itself had failed to do what it was supposed to do. For a man who had spent the better part of that evening filling every silence with noise. The quiet was its own kind of answer. He tried. You have to give him that much. He lifted the microphone once, opened his mouth, and then closed it again. Whatever he had planned to say, whatever line he had rehearsed for the moment after he humiliated someone, it didn't fit anymore. The situation had changed shape on him. He was holding a weapon that no longer worked, and everybody in that room could see it. Elvis didn't look at him, not triumphantly, and not with satisfaction. He just stood there, breathing, the way a man stands after he has done something that cost him real effort. His eyes went to the crowd, not to collect the victory, just to see where he was. He looked calm in the way that people look calm when they have nothing to prove. That was the thing about it. He hadn't walked up there to win. He had walked up there because the challenge had been issued, and something in him simply could not let it go unanswered. Someone near the front called out the champion's name, not unkindly, more like a question, like they were checking to see if he was still there. He raised one hand, a kind of half-wave, and managed something that was almost a smile. But it didn't reach anywhere. The crowd wasn't hostile to him. They weren't booing or turning on him. They were just done with him in the way that people are done with something the moment something better has taken its place. The champion set the microphone down on the stand beside him. That was his concession. Not words, not a handshake, just the quiet act of putting the thing down. And then he stepped back, 2 steps, and stayed there, watching. Elvis turned toward him, just slightly, and what happened next was the part that people who were close to the stage remembered most clearly afterward. Elvis nodded at him. One nod. Simple. Respectful. The kind of nod one man gives another when the matter between them is finished and there's no need to discuss it further. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not condescension, just acknowledgement. You are here. This happened. We're done. The champion nodded back. He didn't have much choice, but something in his face shifted when he did it. Some tightness leaving, some guard coming down. He had expected anger or humiliation or mockery. He had come prepared for any of those. He had not come prepared for this, for a man who had every reason to gloat and simply didn't. The crowd felt that. They felt the absence of it. People who had been waiting for Elvis to say something cutting, something final. To twist the knife just a little found themselves watching him do the opposite. He said nothing cutting. He said almost nothing at all. A few words to the people near the front, quiet enough that they didn't carry far. A brief exchange with someone in the band, nothing designed for the room. That restraint was its own statement, louder, in its way, than anything he had sung. Because anyone with a voice like his could silence a room. Not everyone with a voice like his would then choose silence for themselves. Nobody laughed. Nobody jeered. The crowd gave him something closer to reverence than applause. He accepted it the same way he had accepted the challenge, without making it about himself. Elvis handed back the microphone and stepped off the stage the same way he had stepped on, without announcing himself. Elvis never talked about that night the way you'd expect someone to talk about a moment like that. No press release, no interview where he brought it up unprompted. No story passed around by his own people as a way of building the legend. The people who were there talked. Elvis didn't. That silence said everything. Joe Esposito, who had seen Elvis in more high-pressure situations than almost anyone alive, said years later that what struck him wasn't what Elvis did on that stage. It was how he acted the moment he stepped off it. No adrenaline. No satisfaction on his face. Just a man ready to go home. Like he'd done something ordinary. Like answering that challenge had cost him nothing, because it hadn't. That's the difference between ego and talent. Ego needs the win to feel real. Talent already knows what it is. Charlie Hodge put it a different way. Elvis never needed anybody to confirm what he could do, Charlie said. He knew. He had always known. The rest of us were still catching up. That night just reminded a room full of people of something Elvis had stopped needing to prove somewhere around 1956. What made him Elvis wasn't just the voice. That part is easy to say and hard to fully understand. The voice was extraordinary. But plenty of extraordinary voices have come and gone without leaving a mark like his. What separated him was that he understood, somewhere deep and instinctive, that performance was not about the performer. It was about the people listening. He didn't walk onto that stage to win. He walked on because something in the room needed correcting, and he was the only one who could correct it. That's a different motivation entirely, and it produced something entirely different. The people in the front rows that night described it the same way, independently, years apart. They said the moment he opened his mouth, they forgot about the champion, forgot about the challenge, forgot there had ever been any contest at all. One woman who was standing near the stage said she couldn't tell you afterward what song he chose or how long he sang. She just remembered the feeling. That feeling stayed with her for 30 years, she said. She couldn't describe it. She just knew she'd been inside something real. That's what Elvis did when he was fully present. He made you forget the machinery, forgot the lights and the noise and the circumstance. He pulled you somewhere quiet, somewhere true. And then it was over, and you were standing in a loud room again, blinking, slightly confused about where you'd just been. He never built a reputation off moments like that one. He didn't need to. The reputation was already there, and it was built on the same thing. Showing up, he opening his mouth and letting the voice do what it was always going to do. The Champions Challenge didn't change anything about Elvis Presley. Didn't prove anything he hadn't already proven 1,000 times in 1,000 rooms. It just gave one more group of people a chance to understand what they'd been hearing about their whole lives. After that night, Elvis went back to his regular schedule. Shows, recordings, the grinding machinery of being who he was. Nobody heard him bring it up. Nobody heard him use it as a story. It just became one of those nights that the people who were there carried quietly. Something they'd mention in low voices decades later. Something that still felt slightly unbelievable even to them. He just went back to being Elvis, which was the whole point.